So, Warhammer is a hobby that has multiple avenues to enjoy it, with the extensive and rich lore spanning decades of novels with a black library, the plethora of video games to choose from that appeals to any kind of gamer, the whole reason this hobby is so well known with the extensive library of miniatures you can assemble and paint for your collection, and just taking said collection and forging an army to play against your friends with. There's pretty much an army for everyone, no matter which GWIP you collect. But more often than not, the end goal is to usually have at least 2,000 points of miniatures, so if you're watching this video, that hopefully means you're at that point or you want to get to that point, and now you're itching to play your first game. So let's talk about it. But welcome back everyone, it's me the Warhammer complainy guy, Revan/Handy, destroyer of wallets, and maker of terrible financial decisions. First, if you're interested in Warhammer from the hobby side, that's fine, you can ignore the game completely. But if you're interested in both the hobby and the game, which you just lost, Tabletop Simulator is a great avenue to see if you like the gameplay side of the hobby before you buy any miniatures if you're just looking from the window. If you don't want to get a large army, Kill Team is also a good way to start, albeit a different game system. And you also don't need a 2,000 point army from the get-go, just make it a slow burn and start with 500 points, and then work your way up from there in 500 point increments. So choose however you want to play, because it's your wallet after all. But if you do have a decent collection and can make a functioning army, here's what you should expect to do leading up to your first game, how the game plays out, along with the expectations you need to set for your first game so you don't get disappointed or discouraged. But the first thing you need to do is figure out where you're gonna play. Is it a dedicated Warhammer store or your friendly local game store? Either one works just fine because usually someone will help you schedule a game. At the GW stores I frequented, I would usually show up with my army and tell the store manager I was down for a game, while in the meantime I was assembling some of my miniatures. Then my local game store had a Discord server with an LFG section where I could ask either for a pickup game or schedule games for the store league. And I had no trouble getting games when I played 9th edition. 10th was a bit harder since all I really had when I moved was a GW store. So it was show up to the store with an army and hope there was a table space. Or someone was there for a pickup game too. But now that you know where you're gonna play, it's time to ask for a teaching game. The best way to do this is honestly just ask. It's literally that simple because someone will teach you how to play if you ask. Because for those of us that have played for years, it's become second nature. But here are some important things to mention when scheduling your first game. First is to let them know you've never played a game and that you want to learn how to play the game. Number 2, since this is a learning game, do you want to play a traditional game of 40k with primary and secondary objectives, or do you just want to learn the bare bones so it's essentially going to be a deathmatch? Then third, how many points do you have? This then tells them, okay, I need to make a list for X amount of points. Also, this is advice for those that want to teach new players. For the love of God, make a fluff list and don't use your Seal Club or 40,000 list, because first impressions are important, and if you raffle stomp them into the ground, congratulations, you just lost a potential player for your store and possibly a friend. Okay, so now that your first game is scheduled, what's next? Well, how the f you gotta get your stuff to the game store and what do you need to bring? First, some of the things you'll need, which is of course your army, rule books, dice, a tape measurer and freedom units, and of course a carrying case. Like from my first ever sponsor, Tabletop Stronghold. Tabletop Stronghold is your one-stop shop for all your miniature protection needs, with strong and durable MDF cases like the Mag Case 2.0. And if you need terrain that won't break the bank like GW terrain does, then Tabletop Stronghold has got you covered. Tabletop Stronghold's Mag Case 2.0 is a great way to protect your plastic and resin crack investments from eating it on the concrete, because only the most hardcore and skilled of war gamers can trip on flat surfaces. And these cases secure your minis to these adjustable trays using ancient powers locked away for thousands of years beneath the earth and only recently has been freed by the all-powerful Magnet Wizard. Yes, I'm talking about magnets, the thing that drives me to insanity because I want to get my money's worth out of the plastic crack I just bought. The Mag Case 2.0 comes in multiple sizes, so you can transport any army you can think of no matter how much plastic or resin crack you own. Except for maybe an unpainted Warlord Titan, stop asking. And don't forget to use code CRAFT25 for 25% off your next order using my link in the description or the pinned comment. But thank you Tabletop Stronghold for sponsoring this video. If you want some terrain or a Mag Case 2.0 that ships to pretty much anywhere in the world for free, go to tabletopstronghold.com. So, a transport case for your army is probably one of the most important things you need when going to play at the game store, because of course you want to protect your recent financial investment. A carrying case is one of, if not the second most important purchases of your wargaming career, or was it third? Because you need the minis, the brushes, the paint. Okay, you get the idea. I've beaten the subject of carrying cases to death in some of my other videos, so I'm just gonna move along. But honestly, the most important thing you need besides your army is your army's codex, because this is where all your army's rules are. It's important that before you actually play, you have some idea of how your army functions. So things like which detachment you're playing, interactions between your units, where you think certain units need to be positioned on the board, and many other things. Also, don't get too attached to that mini you spent hours painting, because it will get blasted off the table turn 1. Okay, not all the time, but sometimes. Okay, a lot of the time. And to make the game flow smoothly, a helpful tip is to bookmark specific rules and datasheets relevant to your army. This saves time going back and forth between pages during the phases of the game. But speaking of time, it's audience interaction time. So if you're enjoying the video, you can do your part by doing all that good YouTube stuff like subscribing to the channel, along with liking the video and leaving a comment for the almighty YouTube algorithm. Like, how was your first game of Warhammer? Or what was it like teaching someone how to play? Did you have fun? And was it a memorable experience in a good way? But anyways, it's time for the game. So when you meet your teacher, they should help you step by step with setting up the game, showing you how deployments work, and also the dreaded L-shaped ruins layout that is common to most if not all games of Warhammer 40k these days. Another thing is that it's common etiquette between players to explain how their army works, like their detachment rules, the weapons certain units have, along with their special abilities and some of the common shenanigans they can cause. This helps avoid gotcha moments in the game which are often not very fun, and if you don't explain this, you're seen as a massive dick and nobody will ever want to play with you ever again. But once everything is all set up, it's now time to play. So this is going to be a very brief rundown of a game of 40k. The first thing that happens is deployment, where each player alternates putting down one unit at a time until there's no more units left. Then once deployment is over, you determine who goes first by doing a d6 dice roll off, with the winner choosing to either go first or second. So the command phase and movement phase should be pretty uneventful, that is unless someone fires Overwatch, and if you're teaching someone and you're going second and you do it, no offense, but you're kind of a d***. But what should happen is your teacher starts questioning you. While some of you may think this is annoying, when teaching someone how to play Warhammer, this is something you have to do. Why? Because your teacher wants you to think tactically. Like, if I move X unit right here, are they in range to make a charge, or are they in line of sight of the big scary guns? If I move right here, do I get cover from those big scary guns, making them less scary? Or if I move my stuff right here, can I set up a kill box? Or if I move my stuff right here, is it harder for my opponent to reach me in a charge? You want to start thinking tactically, because this then makes for better games, and I know the game you're probably playing is a deathmatch, but thinking tactically then transfers over to a game with primary and secondary objectives, because it's all one giant game of Risk, although a lot more complicated. But after arguably the easiest phases, it's time for the shooting phase. This is where all that mumbo jumbo about thinking tactically comes into play, along with learning what all these numbers mean. Because during the movement phase, this was all set up for the subsequent phases of the shooting and charge phase. Because the shooting phase can affect the charge phase by either wiping entire units off the board, or making a charge harder by pulling the units closest to the enemy. This is also where you start to learn about this table right here, the strength versus toughness table. At first, this table may seem confusing, but once you start understanding how strength versus toughness works, the game becomes a whole lot easier. This is also again where your teacher might start questioning you, because firing a unit with strength 4 or 5 weapons at a toughness 10 unit instead of these squishy guys right here helps you learn target priorities, because large units like this are what we like to call distraction carnifexes. This is a big scary unit that acts as the distraction that you think you have to deal with, when in reality you can just avoid it or get it locked in melee with something that can wound it. You usually want to shoot at what you have a higher chance of killing, because then your opponent has less options to score on primary and secondaries if you're playing a traditional game. But once the shooting phase is over, it's time for the charge phase. So the charge phase works by using 2d6 to determine the distance you need to make a successful charge, since you need to be within 12 inches for a charge. There are ways to make charges easier, since some units also have rules that say they have a +1 to their charge, so a 9-inch charge is really an 8-inch charge, and vice versa. A -1 to the charge means your opponent now has to make a 10-inch charge instead of a 9-inch charge. I mentioned Overwatch earlier, but you can use it in the movement or charge phase for one command point, but now everything hits on 6s or whatever your critical hit roll is, since I know some units have a critical hit roll on a 5. Like I mentioned earlier, this is where taking into account how you shoot and pull units can determine how a charge phase plays out. But now we get to the fight phase. Usually the way the fight phase works out is the charging unit goes first, unless a model has the fight's first rule or a stratagem. You also pile in as many units as you can to make it more likely you'll kill whatever you're fighting, and once all the charging units' fights are resolved, that's when your opponent fights back. And once all the fights are over, it's end phase where some units do have rules but not that many. And then depending on who won the dice roll, it's now that person's turn to move and do all that stuff too, and then this repeats for 4 more rounds. That is unless one army is wiped from the board, or the points deficit is too high to come back from if you're playing with objectives. But that's usually how games play out. Now, let's talk about some expectations and various other things you should keep in mind for your first game. The first expectation you need to set before you even play your first game is don't get disappointed if you lose your first game. It's a given, but you're probably going to lose your first game. But that's the reason you're learning to play, because if you don't lose, you won't learn from your mistakes. So expect to make a ton of mistakes like forgetting certain units' rules, which unit could have moved or made a charge, or even just forgetting there was an ongoing fight. But while you're playing the game, you should also be bantering with your opponent, because then you'll most likely become friends. Warhammer is a game where you can make lifelong friends. Although mine were from the dice check days and I usually never talk to those at my game store outside of it, I blame my master's thesis. But if everyone at the game store is chill and doesn't take the game too seriously unless it's an RTT, then God help your soul, expect to make some new friends. But you should also be asking questions throughout the game. If you're new, there's no harm in asking the stats of units in your opponent's army. Even us veteran players do that. But you should just ask questions in general. Things like a unit's toughness, movement stats, what kind of damage they can do, how does terrain affect movement or line of sight, how can I improve my list, what units should I add to my army if I don't have 2,000 points yet, what could I have done differently, or even just, hey, that's a really cool model, what colors did you use? Remember, even if you lose your first game, don't get discouraged. Hey, you tried something new, so good job. Take this as a learning experience for how to improve if you actually like the game. If the game isn't for you, that's fine, just keep collecting and painting miniatures. So yeah, this hopefully gives you an idea of how your first Warhammer game should go and the expectations that go with it. Anyways, thanks for watching the video, and a huge thank you to the GIGAist of the Chads right here, the channel members and Twitch subscribers. So if you too want to be a Giga Chad and help fund these stupid adventures, consider becoming a member of either for access to the member section of the Discord and other things. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe, but I have to go make more terrible financial decisions. So I'll see you all in the next video, and remember, when you play Warhammer, being poor is a choice.